Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a good day and it's Friday and you got a little lunch and hopefully you're not in a food coma. Let's get started on time so we can respect everybody's time on a Friday afternoon. My name is Greg Nelson. I'm your Deputy Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer. So we'll be presenting to you the budget that will be going to the board next Tuesday night for its first read. And then subsequently, hopefully the board will approve it at their September meeting. And so the adopted budget is one of the most important documents we have, not only in the finance office, but also the district. It sets the tone for the entire year for all four colleges and the district office. So we're just going to give you a high level overview of what's in the budget document. The document itself is attached in your invitation. It's 137 pages of joyous reading. So I want you to take your time and enjoy that if you so choose. But we're going to get started and look through the budget. But first of all, as we do that, I want to advance. Here we go. Just want to say a special thank you to everybody who participated in putting the budget together. There's been a lot of long nights the last few weeks trying to get this document completed, especially with my arrival at the district and so forth. But also I wanted to take a time to say thank you to everybody in the district, because all your activities and hard work throughout the year helps us in the finance office complete this document in a timely manner. So I really want to say thank you. And also, if you participated in participatory governance during the spring to establish the budget document for the new year, really hats off to you. We couldn't do it without everybody together. So as we get into this document, I want to talk about some of the changes that happened in the prior fiscal year. And so as I arrived in July, we took a look at some things. We were starting to close the books. We had 5 positions that were miscoded that we had an impact to the general fund. We also had about $1.3 million in vendor services that were miscoded improperly, so we had to correct that at the end of the fiscal year. Also, we were coming into the start of July, and we had about $3.5 million that were going to be surplus back to the state in financial aid. When we heard of that, we worked on that. We got that number down to $961,000 that was going to be returned back to the state. So we want to make sure we reserve as much money as we can for our students. And then because of the catching up vendor payments and so forth, if I'm sure you've heard, we had some late fees and penalties of about $55,000 we had to cover as well. Okay, next slide, please. Some of the major changes that you'll see in the budget, to kind of do it in a table format for you from the tentative to the adopted budget, the deficit factor was increased. If you're not familiar with the deficit factor is set by the state. And as the number goes up, that decreases the amount of money coming to the colleges throughout the state. So they did raise the deficit factor about 4 points, if you will, from 2 to 2.4%. They made some Prop 98 adjustments of about $800,000. The student center funding formula, or sometimes referred to as the SCIF, was also adjusted as well. The COLA that many of you already know about was 7%. In the tentative budget, it was 0.76%. They funded the enrollment. You'll see the enrollment change. That's reflective of that 7% COLA adjustment. So the funded enrollment went up. And as a result of that, our hold harmless also went up as well. So as you know, we do not have the enrollment to meet the hold harmless numbers at this time, which I'll talk about in a second. And then our estimated reserves, due to some of the changes I just mentioned in the previous slide, we went from 17.66% and down to 15.27%. So that reserve took a little bit of a hit due to those adjustments at year end. And then the district took the additional reductions based on those changes of $614,000. And so I want to show the reductions as a look for throughout the district. Next slide, please.
Just a point of clarification. Sorry, Deputy Chancellor. It's 0.67, 6.62, not a 7% change in the COLA. So it's just the decimal points accident. I apologize. I just want to make sure people don't think we have a 7% COLA.
Okay. The district-wide reductions that the district talked about in the coming into this year were salary savings from vacancies of about $6 million, discretionary budget targets of $2.1 million. We took the $614,000 that we found that we had to recode at the end of the fiscal year. The district will be taking that cut. We're not spreading that cut to any of the colleges. So the college numbers have remained the same, which I know y'all had discussions at your local campuses about. So our district-wide reductions for the current fiscal year is at 11.8 million. And so we will strive to do better than that if we can, but that is the number we're trying to target for this current fiscal year. Okay, next slide, please. So the budget has a new look and feel this year compared to what it's been in the past. And so the goal is to try to provide you a landscape document, give you more data and more transparency so you can see more trend lines, more visual representations around charts and graphs, because people can be visual learners versus just reading numbers on paper. And it's also a little bit better organized for the colleges. So as you read through the budget book, you'll notice instead of all the colleges being spread throughout so now if Laney College wants to pull out their budget, their entire budget is grouped together. And so the, okay, go ahead, next slide, please. So the state budget highlights reflect a decrease of about $13 billion. You've seen that the state has been working on that number. It started in the 70s and they've worked it down. So they've been working on that. Ongoing augmentation of the SCIF of 143 million. And there's been some one-time funding provided throughout the state that will come out in the form of grants and so forth, such as a $10 million for LGBTQ plus pilot program, expanding the nursing program capacity, and so on. Next slide, please. Changes in the student center funding formula rates. This reflects the 7% I talked about. So they changed the dollar amounts for base credit, incarcerated credit, and so forth. These are different areas within the funding formula. Obviously, the bulk of our funding comes from the base credit portion, and then there's other other attributes to the student center funding formula that go into how we get our funds. Next slide, please. And so you'll see the allocations for the state versus the district. So the first column is the adjustment in millions. You'll see the adjustments for the district and the center, and our allocation overall at 166.5 million for the state budget coming to the district. Next slide, please. So some general budget assumptions, as I mentioned, the reserve is 15.27 for current year expenses. The general fund revenue allocation to the colleges is based on a 3-year average. So those 3-year rolling averages are printed below. So you'll see the 4 colleges there. And that comes from the state's 320 report that we report on a regular basis. So if you have any questions about how much enrollment you get, et cetera, that can be found in the budget book as well. Next slide. So enrollment's then a very important part of what we do here. Students are our mission. And so as you look at the enrollment, the bottom line the very bottom line on the graph is what our actual enrollment currently sits at. The blue line is the hold harmless number that we are currently funded at. The yellow line at the top projects what our projection is that we need to sustain our current expense levels going forward. So you'll see we have some work to do. And I know we're starting to incrementally see enrollment go back up, especially since post-COVID. And we want to keep working that, trying and striving to find efficiencies and programs and so forth and bring students back to campuses so we can close that gap, because this is the last year of our hold harmless for the student center funding formula. So I see that question, good question. So the hold harmless, even though our enrollment is below what we're currently funded at, the state has held us harmless based on the student center funding formula going into place. So we are still receiving funding at the blue line for the state. However, if they were to take that blue line away, our funding would be at the bottom line. So our funding would drastically decrease. Right now, our hold harmless amount of funding, if you think about it in dollars, is a little over $18 million that we actually receive that we otherwise would not receive if that hold harmless was not in place. And so that red arrow shows the gap that we need to try to close over the next couple of years. And if you notice, this goes out. So we're currently in FY 24-25. So you'll see 225, and then you see 2 more years going out, which will tie to the budget document sheet that I'm going to show you in a second. So just to kind of recap, enrollment is a very important part of what we do. And so we need to continue to strive to bring enrollment up. through different ways, initiatives, and so forth. Okay, next slide. Some of those ways we can grow the TCR, or the total computational revenue, is what TCR stands for, is increased engagement of rising scholars and are formerly incarcerated or even are incarcerated programs, trying to work on that because that's a different calculation in the funding formula. Working on our dual enrollment programs, doing targeting enrollment groups, total cost of attendance, and student-centered course scheduling. Those are just some of the ways that you see schools trying to tackle working the formula to their advantage and to what their community needs. Next slide, please. So the adopted budget for 24-25, you'll see the allocations by college and also the district office. So the ending fund balance is at the district office. So just to remind everybody, when you have residual funds at the end of the fiscal year, the money rolls up to the district at the end of the fiscal year, and we hold the reserve for the district. So you'll see that's the total budget for each institution plus the district office. Next slide, please. So this is the large sheet that's new to the budget. So I want to point out that you're used to seeing the current year, the prior year, plus the current year, plus a year. What we try to do in this sheet is really try to give you trend line data. So we try to show you 3 years in the past, the current year, plus 3 years looking forward. So to give you a 7-year snapshot of what the district looks like. So when you look at the boxes that are highlighted there, the first box being the current fiscal year that we just started, we're about 99% sure that number is going to be accurate. And then as you go out to the next year, or it looks like it's in purple, that's 80%, 70% for the yellow box, and then 60%. That's a rolling number. So as each year comes up, those numbers come closer, the average gets more accurate. And so you'll see 24-25, we're pretty comfortable with what that number is going to look like going forward. But given that trend line, like for instance, if you want to look at full-time academic salaries, you can see 2021 through 27-28 to see a chart. You could chart it if you wanted to, what those expenses in that budget looks like for all those different line items. And so this gives us a lot more flexibility as far as data. It gives more transparency to what we're actually trying to do in the district and so forth. You can go to the next slide, please. So the next one I wanted to bring up is the $11 million that we're talking about reducing for the budget for this current fiscal year. So in the tentative budget, the fiscal cliff, as I've been hearing people call it, et cetera, in the 25-26 fiscal year, the highlighted $6.5 million in the tentative budget was about 18 million, was a negative 18 million. So how that transpired was, in the current fiscal year, we were cutting a little over $11 million. When you take that $11 million and it hits the bottom line, or the bottom number in the current fiscal year, then if you take that as a permanent cut, you don't have to count it in the next year. What was happening is it was being counted in this fiscal year, and it was being counted in next fiscal year and the subsequent fiscal years. Essentially, in essence, we doubled it up. So instead of it being $18 million, a little over $18 million, it's actually $6.5 million is what we need to adjust for in the coming fiscal year, not the current fiscal year, the next fiscal year. Subsequently, if you take the $14 million number that's in 26-27, if you were to find the previous year's number of 6.5, the $14 million number would decrease by the 6.5. So the idea is, like I said, as those numbers come closer, that reduction goes deeper, it goes smaller. The idea is here, the fiscal cliff is still there. It's just the hill's not near as steep as it was back in May and June, right? So we're not double counting that $11 million we're taking in the current fiscal year, and we actually feathered it out to where we can actually plan and for these cuts and so forth. Or if we get enrollment back up, the cuts will go lower, because remember, it's based on current enrollment projections. Then as you go down to the bottom red circle, you'll see the current fiscal year we just closed in 23-24, we had a surplus based on the reserve. The reserve of 16.67% is based on the board's action of maintaining 2 months of expenditures that was adopted in May of 2023. That became 16.67%. From a financial calculation, that is what we took as a snapshot in time, and it's been kind of carried forward. So when you look at the current fiscal year we're in 24-25, based on the adjustments we had to make it year in and so forth, you'll see the 15.27% as our ending fund balance for this current fiscal year. And so right now we're under the reserve that's been set for 2 months by $543,000. So the question is, what are we going to do with that negative number? Right now, we're going to sit and wait until the middle of the year. And about around mid-year, we're going to take a snapshot in time and see where we are with the $11 million reduction that we're working on throughout the fiscal year. And if we can take a look at that 543, then we may be able to, that may be adjusted. We may plan for it in the subsequent year, et cetera, and how we move forward. So we're not going to do anything with that right now. We're going to stick with what we have. And then as we get to the middle of the year, we'll make a proper adjustment, shall we need to, in the subsequent fiscal year. Going forward, you'll see those numbers go out. Go to the next slide, please. And this is just bringing it to a larger scale so you can see that a little easier. So you'll see if we do nothing going forward, you'll see the reserve goes from 15.27%, drops to 14, 13, 13. So the goal is we want to keep the reserve at a functional level. So if something were to happen in the district, say something catastrophic, et cetera, I will give you just one anecdotal evidence from the district I came from when the COVID first hit. Remember, it was going to be like 6 to 7 weeks, right? Not 3 years. Everybody remembers that. So the county shut down. I came from Merritt County. The county shut down. We had to cover our own payroll for 2 months. So because the county treasury didn't know what to do and everybody was at home and they didn't have a way, a mechanism at that point in time to work from home. So payroll, I couldn't clear payroll through the treasury. So we cleared our own payroll. I had to use our reserve for that function. So that's just something, that's just one emergency situation where that cash balance comes in to play when the district has a cash balance. The reserve is an important function of the district. And so that is something we want to maintain for emergency purposes. So that shows you what the reserve looks like going forward. You can go to the next slide, please. So the goal is to remain committed to the plan that we have set for the year, continue to work to find efficiencies and refine processes. We had a meeting this morning where we're trying to work on the contract process for the rest of this year. So that's going to help with some of that efficiency. We must improve enrollment for fiscal stability. I can't emphasize that enough. We have to work on enrollment. It's a total team effort to get enrollment up, and we have to be creative in doing so. We have to plan strategically and how we're going to do things, not in the short term, but the long term. So the decisions we make today have a direct impact on what we do next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And then also continue for greater understanding and transparency. My hope is that that's what this budget document does. It gives more transparency to what's going on in the district. And we will continue to evolve this document so it has greater transparency and documentation going forward. So yes, the budget book will probably get a little thicker as things move forward, but the goal is so that there's more understanding and greater transparency with the data that we actually have at our fingertips. And so with that, I'm not sure if there's questions or so forth, but Chancellor, I don't know if you want to say anything to stop here, but I'll answer questions if Richard's going to help moderate that for me.
Sure. I can help with that, Greg. I see Jeff Sensiri has his hand up. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, Deputy Chancellor, thank you again for this presentation. It was really, really helpful. I have just a quick question about the reserves. It says that we're just over $500,000 short, 500K short of where we want to be. I guess my question about the reserves is that number mandated by anything aside from what the board said they wanted it to be?
So the board has a policy. There is best practices around the state, and there's also state law. State law says 3%. The problem at 3%, and I don't know of any district that's even close to that.
Yeah.
Is you get put on a special watch or special trustee by the state. Usually 5 is the minimum for accreditation, and so most districts at this point in time are up in the upper teens and the 20s due to federal stimulus funds and so forth. But
Okay.
yes, that is a function of the board at this point in time.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just thinking like if there was a penalty or something like that for coming up short or anything like that.
No, not outside the district. No.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm good.
but-
Thank you.
Jeff, can I just add in, Deputy Chancellor, do you mind? Like the amount that we have in reserve though has implications for our ability to get ratings, right? So better ratings for our bonds, for doing things. 2 months of salary is a requirement. That is why the board changed the policy, because not a requirement by, so Deputy Chancellor is correct and all those things, but if we want to be eligible for certain funds, we have to be able to show that we have 2 months of operating expenses in the pipe. So I wanted to just make sure that there are a lot of different factors that were evaluated by in the state, and it helps us with other pieces. So what might not make sense for like accreditation, or the state might not be asking us for us, like if we want good bond ratings and then we're going to get more dollars on like our investment kind of thing, that's and our rating is better, that these all play a piece of that. So I hope that helps contextualize a little bit as well.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Great.
Can I add actually in as well?
Yeah, Richard's going to moderate here.
Yeah, thanks.
It's to answer this question though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we were required, I want to say it was the year before last, to actually put in 2 months worth of a reserve. So that dramatically changed our reserve. You guys, some of you are aware of that, some of you won't be aware of that. So aside from the best practices and standards, the state chancellor's office, we had to communicate that and actually change our reserve at that point. I think Dr. Jackson was our chancellor at that time. So I just wanted to share that context as well.
Thank you. Richard?
Great, thank you. The next person, Donald Moore.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I want to ask about, I saw that from our general monies, we're doing 2 million each year for the bad debt, which is the student debt. How are we going to be doing $2 million from the general fund for how long are we going to be doing?
All right, great question. So the 2 million is a liability fund that we maintain for bad debt. So we're not actually paying off bad debt. That's a cash reserve we must maintain for our bad debt at the district. So that is accumulation of all 4 colleges. So we maintain that per our accounting standards in the budget and accounting manual. We have to maintain a liability reserve for bad debt. So there's no cash actually going out. That is cash on hand. In theory, the idea is if the district were to shut down, it's not happening, but if it were to shut down, we have to have money to pay off bad debt. And so that's what that money liability is there for. It sits on our books, on our cash and trial balance here at the accounting office, and that's what it's for. So you see that in our audit documents, you see it on our budget. So that number has to stay there to help us write off bad debt, shall we just deem to do so. But there is no cash actually going out at this time. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Donald. Next person is Angel Kim.
Hi, I think Ramona and I had the same question, but just in terms of calculating the budgets in like some of the like the third or the second slide, I think there's something called hold harmless. Just trying to wrap my brain around what does that mean and how does that influence the bottom line?
Yeah, okay, so great. So I alluded to this in the presentation, but when you look at the slides, you'll see on the graph, it's a dark gray graph that shows our enrollment. The hold harmless is part of the student center funding formula. Thank you. And the bottom line is our actual current enrollment. If we were not to have the hold harmless agreement that we have with the state right now, which is across the entire state, our funding would drop to that bottom line. Right now, the hold harmless maintains our funding at the blue line where it says TCR funded. That's the current funding formula. And so at the end of the day, what we want to have happen is after this fiscal year, the hold harmless drops. Then the current funding level becomes our new, what they call the floor. of the funding formula. So, however, what happens is as step and column costs go up, salaries go up, et cetera, we don't receive any more money from the state until we actually go above that floor. And so that's what's important about the hold harmless, is if we did not have the hold harmless in place, we are currently being held harmless by the state for $18 million. So if that were to go away, we would have to cut even more money off the current budget to satisfy that reduction.
So what exactly is the difference between the yellow line and the blue line then again?
So the yellow line shows, if you look at it, they're almost parallel to each other, and the yellow line goes up in the outer 2 years based on our current spend rate. That's what our enrollment should look like to offset our current expenses going forward if we were to do nothing else.
So can I also add, so might help Angel to explain that we get funded at 15,524, right? Like FTS, and we're earning about 12,000. Does that make, so that's actually what it is. Like our actual number of full-time equivalent students in the district is about 12 something. Sorry, I don't have the number right in my brain. And then, but we're getting funded at much more, right? Pre-COVID levels, that kind of thing. So that's what hold harmless is in like an easy way to think about it. Does that help?
That helps so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, Richard.
Thank you, Gabriella.
I had a question regarding outreach. I was wondering, what ways are the colleges looking at for outreach currently to gain more students?
So
to Chancellor.
yeah, thank you so much. So our plan today is not to have a larger conversation about these things, but these are things we're going to be talking about in participatory governance. These will be talked about at the colleges. I see our college presidents on the line here today. So we're having a concerted effort. But you remember the slide that was showed up above that said ways that we can do things, right, to support the district. So I want to just remind everybody that we added 40 full-time equivalent faculty positions to 40 FTE to the the allocation for classes this fiscal year for dual enrollment. So we're funding dual enrollment specifically. 3 of the colleges you'll see on the next board agenda that'll go live hopefully later today are having Rising Scholars grants, right? So working with our justice impacted, formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, and juvenile justice system students. So we're really proud of the work that's happening in that regard. We're working on some of the efficiencies and things like that. So we're not planning to speak about specifics here today, but I will say that I recently saw recent reports. Our enrollment is going up from where we were last year at this time. It is up to where we are this time. There's been, if you got your Love Your Future thing in the mail, like there's been a lot of concerted effort from the marketing teams across the colleges to really get messages out to students. So we see some provisions or things like that, but hopefully, Gabriella, what you'll see is this is concerted work by all of us in the district community this next year to be talking about the ways that we can improve these things. Does that help? Okay.
I believe Gabriella asked an additional question because I'm trying to keep the chat involved. Have they considered door to door? I'm not sure what you meant by that, Gabriella.
So she's out knocking on doors and right?
Yeah.
So we did a mailer to like 200 and something thousand residents. I can't speak for what the colleges are doing directly. So again, that'll be, a future conversation, but appreciate the feedback about considering that as an option.
Thank you. Okay. Sean McDougall.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks. One question I have, sometimes it feels like, from my experience, that some of the conversations we have about our budgets sort of lack a dimension of comparison. Like, so for example, I would wonder, and I haven't looked at the document yet, but I wonder, just like we were comparing our level of reserves to other colleges around the state, and sort of that gives us a sense of how relative relatively well we're doing. It would be nice to look at those lines and sort of what percentage we are in terms of hold harmless in a relative sense of how other campuses, other colleges, other districts around the state are doing, because this is statewide stuff. And oftentimes what happens, at least for me as a faculty, conversations about sort of how well our district are doing without that relative aspect, there's like this kind of like sort of abstract sort of metric of you need to do better. But like if we're doing better than other campuses or not, that's more important in terms of the overall state and the future funding, right? Because the state's not going to shut down all community college campuses. You know what I'm saying? So I guess what I'm saying is like relative numbers like would be very, very useful, especially when we look at these trend lines about how we're doing compared to the state funding and hold harmless and stuff. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a conversation. These are great conversations for our PBC and for the district, the college budget committees to beginning to have about related to things. There are so many contingencies within districts and around districts that make us so uniquely different than other places. So it is a little bit hard. I will say Bay Area colleges have been hit more by the SCIF. This has been an ongoing area where we've had advocacy that's working on a Bay 10 like CEOs that are like coming together to say, look at how we've been harmed in the communities we serve where other people are doing that. So there is those advocacy pieces. The nuts and bolts sometimes make it hard. So we will often try to do it. Sometimes it doesn't work to do it on the Bay 10 because many are, what are we called? They're basic community funded districts. Our deputy chancellor came from a community funded district. It's very, very different than the way that we're funded. The district I came from before, when I left here, was a community funded district, right? So they have just a little bit of a different contingency. And then particularly decision making that's made. If I look at the Los Rios Community College District, their decision to have less full-time faculty on the ranks and have more part-time faculty has a distinction on how their budget looks, right? What they're able to do. So it's a really nuanced thing. So Sean, I super appreciate like the interest in what you're saying. I think for the adopted budget conversation, that's a hard thing. We won't do that, but really good feedback that we can do some study sessions and talk about how we can do that. So I really appreciate.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because it's like, I think of credit scores, right? Your credit score is this, and people with lack of information, people reduce everything to one number, and that's ends up being this very super panoptic view that actually misinforms more than it actually helps people make good decisions about strategy. So yeah, thank you very much.
Such a good point. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Jeff Sanseri.
Yeah, that's me again. Just a quick question. I saw a couple in the chat, and it reminded me that my understanding from just previous finance people as well as like some board members that in the future, once hold harmless ends, that actually becomes our floor, with the exception that we don't get any any COLA for it in subsequent years, right? So I just want to make sure that that's true. I mean, I don't necessarily I'm not celebrating that necessarily, but I just wanted to know.
That's actually correct. That in the short term, that's fine. Long term, that becomes problematic because step income increases for everybody, et cetera. So our expenses, as you know, keep going up. So we're going to hit that ceiling floor, and we're going to hit that number really quickly in the next couple of years. So that's why the hold harmless is really important for everybody around the state, is everybody's trying to find metrics to get us to that point to where we can sustain our current enrollment and our current operations with the funding we have from the state.
And then I just want to put a finer point on it too, Jeff, you said it, everybody should know we will not be eligible for COLA. So I want to be really clear. What you saw happen in that one table, right, is the fact that COLA got factored into the SCIF. So what changed is our money went up, how much we got from SCIF, right? But the deficit factor was bigger, so we're actually getting left money. We will not get COLA. We will not be eligible for COLA. So next year they decide it's a 2% COLA. No, we're going to stay where we are. So that's like a really important point, to make that distinction.
Very true. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.
I have a question, and I'm apologize for coming in late, the lateness. But I wanted to ask, how are we using categorical funded monies to integrate where there could be potential shortfalls from general funds coming from the state in the future? Is there going to be some kind of level of discussion, a wider range at a governance, or do we start that looking at that process now and using categorical funds to bridge and integrate better?
I think categoricals are a great point to make sure we integrate. We do backfill some categorical programs with general fund dollars because there's not enough funding for some of those categorical programs. Not all, but there are some. I think that's a great discussion for PBC to have in the fall around how we can do better with our categorical funding and how we can make greater impacts across the district. But I do think that's something we can certainly talk about in a study session, et cetera. I don't have an answer for you today, obviously. I think a lot of minds together can work through that and come up with a goal in mind. And just like we talked about the last couple of weeks, a couple of little small conversations can turn into great ideas across the district. So I think that's something we can certainly bring up at a future time.
And I'm going to double down on what Deputy Chancellor said and say, absolutely, right? This is what we're calling to action, everybody, this next year, right? Is ways that we can work more collaborative together, thinking about braiding of funds where we stay in compliance with things. But I do want to add a point that everybody should know. So we have categorical funding that comes ongoing from the state. We're appreciative of it or whatever. A lot of times when the governor adopts a budget, COLA doesn't go to those programs. So I want to say that oftentimes the salaries and benefits and the things on those actually we carry in the general fund. So they only provide COLA to certain things. So I've been doing statewide advocacy over financial aid for a long time. They have never given COLA to financial aid administration for decades, right? We are trying to get that rate changed. So what happens is if your district decides that you're going to do an increase in salary, right? And you get a state COLA and then you get funded at that, right? What happens sometimes is those categorical programs are not the same. So the general fund takes and has to make whole those employees. So I just want to be clear that oftentimes, and that's a lot of the advocacy that's gone on with EOPS, DSPS, right? So you'll see called out in the budget often the categorical programs that are eligible for COLA, and some of the other programs that we do get funding from do not get those annually. So I want to just make sure that you know it's really complicated. There's just nuances to these things. I'm very passionate, sorry, with my hands about the budget. Okay. These are really great questions. I'm very impressed with everybody's engagement. Other questions?
If there's no other questions, did you want me to go through some of the chat questions to see if we should answer those, Greg?
Yeah, let's just go through the chat and see if there's relevant questions that we can answer for folks.
Okay, the first one I'm seeing, it looks like it was from Melanie Dixon saying, Deputy Chancellor Nelson, 24-25 becomes our floor, question mark. I'm questioning that.
No, she's saying.
Is she saying that?
She's saying that, so yes.
I was confirming it with a question, and as I posed the question to confirm, Deputy Chancellor Nelson answered it at the same time. So I put thanks, but I appreciate you checking that.
No, just want to make sure it's included. Donald said, what plans do we have to increase our FTS, whether dual enrollment or non-credit expansion or whatever? What is our plan to increase?
Or whatever.
Yeah, the chancellor answered that in terms of this year, what's going to be happening. And obviously there seems to be like, we're going to be doing something about an $11 million thing that also is happening. So people need to have that on their minds too. And I am assuming, again, all of that discussion is going to come forward, and that a plan, Tamil, will be formulated so we all know what we have to do moving forward and what areas we're going to be supporting. So thank you.
Great.
Yeah. Can I just respond to that? Dr. Moore, appreciate the comment. I just want to remind you all, so remember, this budget presentation is a budget in time. This is the adopted budget. There was a lot of discussion, so go back and watch the tentative budget presentation, because the tentative budget did talk about our plan to take the $11 million cut, right? So it's now increased a little bit, but there are some serious things in there. Operational efficiencies across the district. This is me talking about us coming together and thinking like, do we need 20 contracts with X? Like, how do we be more efficient? How do we operate more, together cohesively? Where are there opportunities for us to kind of think about those synergies and economies of scale? There was also vacancy savings, which continues to be an ongoing thing where It takes us a while to fill positions across districts. They do budget for this sometimes. Deputy Chancellor had a different term for it. But what we're doing is saying, I don't want the colleges to cut to the bone and the district service center. We've been doing that year after year. We're trying to come up with a more transparent way. And this came out of also, if you remember, some of you who went to the PFT's presentation on the budget, one of those things is like, why does you always say this? And then you have more money at the end of the year than what looks like, and it looks like this is happening. Well, a lot of that does come from vacancy savings that happens out of actual personnel. So it's not, we're holding the money or anything, but it's like, Cooney Hay is leaving from the vice president of instruction. I'm just thinking of a name, right? I see Dr. Richardson's name on there. We're quote unquote, this is not actually a good example, but like we're recruiting for her position, right? So the time we're recruiting for her position, her salary and benefits is staying on the books, right? And oftentimes we're going to get better at this. It's taking us months and months and months to fill those positions. Those are savings dollars, but districts have these dollars. So we're planning for it on the front end. And then the colleges took, the colleges and district service center also took a portion of the cuts, and those have already been built into what was presented to the board as the tentative budget. And then we'll go forward now into the adopted budget. So Dr. Moore, I just wanted to explain there was a little bit of a more deeper plan that was sort of more detailed when we discussed the tentative budget. And these are just those operational changes and small things that have come from the governor, doing the budget in June, and then also some of those operational things that you saw that happened to us as we were closing the books.
Great. I think the only other question I'll bring up is Ramona asked, do we continue to receive a hold harmless amount no matter enrollment going up or down? And any other questions, you guys should just let me know if I missed one.
So the hold harmless does end. But as the chancellor mentioned, and the enrollment shows, we're funded, that it becomes our new floor. So we're going to stay there, right? So as the chancellor mentioned, there's no more COLA, there's no more increases but as our cost increase as a district, we don't receive any more money until our enrollment gets to that floor number, that 15,000 and change FTES. When right now we're at 12,000 and change. So we've got some room to make up to where before we can start receiving more money from the state based on the funding formula model. So I also noticed in the chat that somebody posted the compendium. So if you see if you want to go to the state chancellor's website and look at the compendium of allocations, you can see the allocations across the state, including Peralta. So that's a good resource document the chancellor put together a few years ago. So you can actually see the resources and how they're allocated throughout the state if you're curious about other colleges, districts, etc. Just to clarify, 40 additional faculty were hired for outreach.
No, so when we do allocation targets for building the schedule, the district-wide just selects and distributes out and has targets for each college gets a target and those things. So 40 additional FTE were done directly for dual enrollment is what I was trying to explain.
Yeah, but great questions, folks. I mean, great. I appreciate the turnout on a Friday afternoon too.
That's just for dual enrollment. So only for people who are like dual enrollment, like people who are going to other colleges or like high school as well, or?
So thank you. It's a great question. So this is to offer courses in dual enrollment partnerships. So those are partnership courses or things that are for high school. Where students in our high schools or in local schools are dual enrolled in college and getting credit. So the colleges each have a program.
And I'm sorry for going before us, Sewell. I didn't notice the hand. I'm sorry.
And I'm trying to
go ahead, Greg.
To clarify, in terms of the graph, funding remains flat at blue line after this year doesn't drop to pink. Funding can rise if in the future if pink line actually rises above the blue line hold harmless floor. That's actually correct. And so the goal is to get our enrollment up. And the yellow line on that graph represents where we should be based on our expenses that are projected in those out years. Okay. Last call for questions.
I see one, Greg, from Chris. It says, as simply as possible, if academic departments see enrollment demand outstrips our class offerings, do we currently have funds that can be used to offer additional class sections, perhaps a late start or as a late start fall classes or additional FTF for spring?
We do not. And, you know, the targets and so forth that you have is pretty well set. I'd refer you back to your presidents and your process at your executive level so that you can determine what's the best allocation of your FTS at your college level, because every college has got a little different nuance on how they want to allocate, what programs they offer, what has better enrollment than others, et cetera. So I would refer you back to your college leadership team to help you understand where your allocations of classes are going. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for their participation today. I love the questions. I appreciate it. We're always available as well. So if you have questions privately, et cetera, that you didn't want to ask openly, feel free to email us or give me a call. We'll be happy to walk you through it. And I appreciate your time, and have a great weekend and get some rest and relaxation on me. Take care.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chancellor. Take care, you guys.